Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 12th chapter in the book of Numbers. And in the book of Numbers, we find the nation of Israel on the march, and several significant things happen in the course of the book of Numbers. We don't have time to get into the broader context, so we're just going to start by saying that Moses was not the only person to whom Yahweh ever spoke, not only in history, but in his lifetime. And in the 11th chapter, we witness he's overwhelmed by the awful burden of leading this nascent nation, and so he's equipped with 70 people who end up prophesying in mass. Prophecy is the act by where we receive revelation from Yahweh and pronounce it. And his designated successor, Joshua, harbors envy, not unlike we see in the disciples, the apostles in the New Testament, when they found a man performing exorcisms and they weren't part of their inner group, so they didn't want them to enjoy that privilege. But prophecy is a privilege and a responsibility, and as beneficiaries of it, we should be respectful of wherever it manifests, in whoever and in whatever form. So the opening verse reads, "Now Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite wife whom he had taken, for he had taken a Cushite wife." Cush is a nation in ancient Africa, the sub-Saharan Africa, so we understand this woman would have been black, and Moses was as much of a multiculturalist as anyone else in his day. He grew up in the cosmopolitan court of Egypt, which would have been in Thebes by the New Kingdom time, and there he had exposure to education and culture that the nation he was leading lacked. And he also spent some time in the Midian wilderness where he acquired his first wife. So he didn't, his children were not full-blooded Hebrews, and that's perhaps why Aaron was elected to, Aaron who was born in slavery. Aaron and Moses were his sisters. And Aaron's progeny was designated in the role of high priest. And the nature of their complaint was, "And they said, Has Yahweh spoken only through Moses? Has he not also spoken through us? And Yahweh heard it." So they were advertising the fact that Moses was not the exclusive recipient of divine messaging. He, in fact, had worked through them. In Miriam, we read prophesied early in Exodus 15:1, and Aaron had the task and burden of performing in the high priest capacity, so it would have been unlikely that Yahweh would have only spoken to one of them, but even so, they had no grounds for challenging him, and that is the nature of their rebellion. And the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. That's a pretty tall statement. That means his meekness, it's alternately translated as, was unprecedented and unduplicated. And meekness is the emotional position with which we must approach being recipient of revelations if we want to expect a greater harvest and more abundant access to greater revelations. It demands a humility in spirit, which is not natural to the natural man. Hence, the natural man is not capable of receiving or acting on or benefiting from revelatory information. And he expressed much of the meekness for which he was just praised for in 12:3 in the 11th chapter, when he's ecstatic at the fact that there are 70 men in his midst prophesying, that he's not the only one who has to do it. He's not so jealous of the privilege that he guards it as does Joshua. "And suddenly Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron and Miriam, 'You three, come out to the tent of appointment.' So the three came out. Now he addresses them in the order of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. So that order indicates the hierarchy of closeness to Yahweh between them. And he's issuing an order, so he means business, and he has something to say. And what does he say? He says, "And Yahweh came down in a column of cloud and stood in the door of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went forward." So we understand that he very much meant business, and the cloud was how he manifested himself to the Hebrews throughout the Exodus period. His presence was contained in the cloud, and the tent of appointment may have been related to the tabernacle, which was where his presence habitually dwelled. And he means business, and what does he say? And he said, "Hear now my words. If your prophet is of Yahweh, I make myself known to him in a vision, and I speak to him in a dream." Visions and dreams were the ordinary but enigmatic means through which prophecies were received. Now, a dream is distinct from a vision in that a vision is a conscious experience, but they both entail not every revelatory or theophany being the theological term for the revelation, personal revelation of Elohim, and not every time not every prophecy engages both the sense of hearing and the sense of sight. So there is a difference, and there are degrees of revelation. And dream was the way that he often spoke through strangers. So being a beholder of a vision from Yahweh almost always indicated that you belonged to him. Not so with my servant Moses. He is trustworthy in all my house. So Moses had been proven to be in the good esteem and estimation of Yahweh, who is the judge of this tribunal, which Miriam and Aaron inadvertently called by challenging his authority, because meek people don't challenge people in authority. They're content to settle and perform in whatever capacity they're placed at to their best of their abilities, and they do not seek praise, but are content with a job well done. I speak with him mouth to mouth and plainly, and not in riddles, and he sees the form of Yahweh. So why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So they had some brazen audacity to approach and challenge the one to whom had the most intimate and fullest access to Elohim in all of his majesty. He spoke to him mouth to mouth like a friend. Now that is conversation is the activity which takes place between friends. So in a conversation, it takes two to tango. So Moses was privileged enough to speak, and many times we do find him speak, sometimes in an intercessory capacity, but often just asking questions for his personal knowledge. And riddles means there's no mystery, so there's often a mysterious component in the revelation of Elohim. He gives us just enough to what we need to know, but there is almost always an element of mystery intact. So he speaks to him unambiguously by not in riddles, and sees the form. Now no one can literally see or behold with the eyes of the body the physical presence of Yahweh, because there is no physical presence. And the displeasure of Yahweh burned against them, and he left. So he gets the final word and issues the judgment upon leaving. And so displeasure is synonymous with wrath. So Miriam, she's gonna find herself unpleasantly struck with leprosy. But that's getting a little far ahead of ourselves. We're gonna read it from the 10th verse. And the cloud turned away from above the tent. And look, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron turned towards Miriam. And look, a leper. So leprosy was a cruel physical condition, which was the ancient equivalent of the AIDS virus, in which there was no known cure. And it was a horrific skin ailment, which corroded the skin and disabled nerve receptors, so it was not uncommon for lepers to chew their lips off, for example. And they were designated to be separate from the community of Israel. They posed a health risk, and they were to have their own separatist community, and there was a process through which they could be prescribed clean by priestly examination and admitted back into the camp. So there's no permanent leprosy that he's inflicting Miriam with, but it is for a purpose, and it does have a message, and it does have a lesson. And Aaron said to Moses, O my master, please do not hold against us the sin in which we have done foolishly and in which we have sinned. So he's aware of the fact that even though he was not struck with leprosy, he was equally guilty in his own way, as was his sister. they both harbored envy towards their elder brother, who was privileged to lead over them, and they were privileged enough to serve under him in immediate capacities, but that wasn't enough for these people. So from that humble awareness springs a petition to him to intercede on his behalf, his and Miriam's behalf, more directly for Miriam, but also for him, because he was somewhat responsible for what happened to Miriam, and he is very much aware that it could have been him. Please do not let her be as one dead when coming out of its mother's wombs, with our flesh half consumed. So this is the tail end and the ultimate destiny of leprous people. They were shriveled and corroded and had no signs of viable or healthy skin left intact on their carcass. And flesh half consumed, that's not a pleasant experience. We don't even want to imagine what it was like, but if you want to, it's not going to be pleasant. And Moses cried out to Yahweh, saying, "O El, please heal her, please." So by the double repetition of please, he's approaching him with good manners, and good manners is a manifestation of meekness, and it's because of that meekness that he has the ear of Yahweh and is able to wish righteous wishes that will be accommodated upon request. And Yahweh said to Moses, "If her father had but spit in her eye, would she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and after that let her be readmitted." So he's imposing the duration of the probation from the being in the community. So she had to be physically exiled for a period of 7 days, which was rather merciful in the fact that she had leprosy. Most lepers, it only got worse as time passed by, and it would have been rare for any of them to pass the priestly inspection, but there are mechanisms in the Mosaic law whereby lepers who are in the state of recidivism with their affliction could present themselves before priests, and it was one of the priestly tasks to inspect them to make sure that they were not contagious and no longer sick. And Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not depart until Miriam was readmitted. So Yahweh's wish becomes the reality, and there's no way around it. And the whole entire operation, remember, Israel was a nomad nation on the move, and they had been standstilled while she recovered. So she did play, she was an integral cog in the operation, yet at the same time, she didn't serve very well in that role at this moment in time. And afterward the people departed from Hatzerah, and they camped in the wilderness of Paran. These are two locations which would have corresponded with the wilderness area which existed between Egypt and Israel, the modern countries. We're not aware of the precise location, so when we are ignorant, we just move on, and because there's nothing more to talk about, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for next time. Bye-bye.